Greetings, friends. My name is Anna Nichenko, and now we will dive in the top news of this day. The Ukrainian army is now preparing for a spring offensive. Based on the lessons of the past 13 months, a Ukrainian path to victory is entirely plausible. A less than perfect outcome can still amount to remarkable achievement, and it is within Ukraine's reach. Among other things, the country's supporters will be watching carefully, assessing whether the victory that Kyiv seeks is feasible. But there is good reason to think that it could succeed beyond what skeptics believe. Ukraine's military leaders have proved wily, agile, and resourceful to a degree that their Russian counterparts have not, and the cumulative effect of coming Western armaments will increase the firepower at their disposal in multiple ways. Kyiv seeks to recover all territories lost since 2014, including Crimea and all of eastern Ukraine, a definition of victory that President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly articulated and will not renounce lightly. Yet military circumstances may force Ukraine's leaders to yield. Despite its best efforts, the army may be unable to evict Russia from all lost territories. The West, having realized that, may press Kyiv to make hard choices because it wants to avoid endless and even costlier war. The more so if Western economies start encountering even stronger economic headwinds and fatigue takes hold in Ukraine. This scenario, while not inevitable, cannot be dismissed outright.
This is a strategic defeat of a Russian military and political leadership. The business elite has long been clear. There is understanding, but there is no readiness for resistance, maximum willingness to try to protect their interests in exchange for information or interaction. Well, I think that there will be readiness for more decisive actions. Andriy Yusov, representative of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine.
Yes, Russia has more population and accordingly more soldiers, but members can be misleading. For one thing, they say nothing about combat readiness, which has been a problem for Russia in part because many of the Russian army's non-commissioned officers and other personnel dedicated to training have been sent to the front or to staff hollowed-out battalions. These problems will worsen the longer the war continues. As reported by Ukrainian General Staff, Russia loses more than 180,000 soldiers. But even if Russia's actual losses are only tenths of this number, they exceed the Red Army's total during its decade-long war in Afghanistan. And we are hoping that they have created a shortfall in troops. The Russian army's bullheaded assault on Bakhmut, which began in August and continues despite huge casualties, casts a doubt on the claim that it has learned more from early mistakes and started fighting more severely. Detail the repeated attacks on places such as Kamianka, Vuhledar and Avdiivka, despite the heavy toll in troops, many newly mobilized and equipment exhausted by Ukrainian forces occupying higher ground. Yet the larger the army, the greater it needs, which highlights another problem, the deficiencies of Russia's military supply system. Reports of ill-equipped troops heading into battle persist, as do stories about families' feverish efforts to provide them with basic necessities such as helmets and vests. Even Russian officialdom has acknowledged the equipment shortages. Although Russia has far more military hardware than Ukraine, its losses have also been surprisingly high. In Russia, military authorities turned to tanks dating back to the 1960s and even the 1940s, as well as the recent decision to rely more on motorized rifle units. There is also the question of morale, impossible to quantify but critical in war. Unlike Russians, Ukrainians are defending their homeland against an invader and believe that losing the war could lead to the loss of their country, a sentiment that victories to Ukraine had repeatedly.
They have much of the capability that they need to continue to be successful. We've trained an enormous number of troops. We've provided a substantial number of platforms, and so I think he feels that they're in a pretty good position, and we'll stay focused on continuing to generate security assistance capability so that they can continue to be successful whenever they choose to take up offensive operations.
Huge quantities of Western weapons are heading to Ukraine as it prepares for its spring offensive. Tanks and combat vehicles of the infantry will increase its skill in armored vehicles. The former will help to break through the Russian defenses, and the latter will provide the infantry with better protection and faster speed. Mobile artillery and air defense will make the tandem even more powerful. It will take months for all the planned weapons to arrive, and Kyiv continues to worry about the lack of artillery and shells. But what we are not worried about is that our military leadership will achieve these goals. Because we, Ukrainians, currently have no other choice for our nation to survive. Ukraine has organized the first Black Sea Security Conference, which was held today in Bucharest. The conference is part of the International Crimea Platform, a mechanism aimed to the occupation of Crimea, restoration of Black Sea, European and global security. We thank Romania for hosting this important event. Ukraine, Romania and Moldova join forces to counter the impact of Russia's full-fledged war on Ukraine on the security situation in the Black Sea and Azov Sea regions and beyond. Our three countries will also discuss a potential strategy for responding to challenges and threats, as well as the pillars of the region's future security configuration.
Peace will not last long if Russia retains control over one or another part of Ukraine, in particular Crimea. It's time to develop a comprehensive safety net for all countries in the region that feel threatened by a maniac on the loose. It's time to turn the Black Sea into what the Baltic has become, the NATO Sea. Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
So Ukraine and its partners are joint efforts to address security challenges in the Black Sea and Azov Sea regions. Russia's unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine has challenged the Black Sea and Azov Sea security system. Russia, unlike the West, has always had a strategy for the Black Sea region. The Kremlin's first attempt to launch a military invasion of Crimea took place 20 years ago during the escalation around Tuzla Island in the Kerch Strait. So there must be a comprehensive security system for all countries of the region threatened by Russia.
A year ago, on this day, Ukrainian Navy forces hit the Russian flag warship cruiser Moskva, and it became very important and famous dive site in the Black Sea. I believe this is a good symbol of today's event and guarantee of productive work. More than 400 days ago, Russia started a full-scale invasion that has killed thousands, forced millions to flee their homes, reduced entire cities to rubble, and posed a military conflict on a scale that Europe hasn't seen for the last 80 years. The invasion made it obvious for European countries that food is used as a weapon, energy is used as a weapon. And the war spread its influence far beyond the borders of actual hostilities.
Exactly 1 year ago, on April 13, 2022, the enemy cruiser Moscow was self-confidently in the territorial waters of Ukraine, near the Zmyny Island. A missile strike from the Ukrainian complex Neptune helped the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation to find another, the only possible course for Russian warship to the bottom. Without exaggeration. The destruction of the cruiser Moscow is a stunning success in the war with the Russian aggressor. To a large extent, it was this event that enabled the security and defense forces of Ukraine to liberate Zmyny Island, to force the Russians to unblock shipping trade routes, to reduce the level of threats from the Black Sea water area, strike at the enemy's moral and psychological state, to assure Muscovites that the occupation of Crimea is inevitable. The death of the cruiser Moscow became the most expensive military loss for Russia in the war with Ukraine. According to Forbes, the probable cost of the cruiser is $750 million. Having become the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the cruiser took part in the war with Georgia in 2008 and the blockade of the Ukrainian fleet in Donoslav in 2014. Also, its crew performed combat missions in Syria in 2015. At the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, the ship took part in an attack on the garrison of Zmyny Island on the Odessa region.
I invite everyone to a famous dive spot on the Black Sea. We will have excursion. First, the sister in Mykolaiv, the Moscow ship, an exact copy. And then, underwater, it will be a museum in 2 locations.
I'll remind you that the Russian military is very actively preparing for the defense of the temporarily occupied Crimea. They dug hundreds of kilometers of trenches along the beaches of the peninsula. Also, the Russian invaders began to build fortifications in the depths of the Crimea. There is a concentration of Russian troops. And in continuation of the topic of security in the Black Sea, the day before, the Russians deliberately blocked the export of grain from Ukraine and thereby violated the terms of the grain agreement. This was emphasized by the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine, Yuri Yaskov, in the comment to The Guardian. According to him, on Tuesday, April 11th, the representatives of the United Nations, Turkey and Russia did not conduct an inspection of ships with Ukrainian grain because the representatives of Russia crossed out the agreed names and added other ships from the queue to the list. Because of this, not a single ship could pass the inspection, which is equivalent to the actual introduction of a blocked by Russia.
We have a critical situation. The Russians violated the terms of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. They decided to unilaterally change the plans of Ukrainian ports. This is unacceptable. Yuri Vaskov, Deputy Minister for Communities, Territories and Infrastructure Development of Ukraine.
Yes, the grain corridor has already started working after the blockade by the Russia Federation, but who will give a guarantee that it will not happen again on the day when Russia wants it? Currently, the United Nations is trying to reassure, in particular, the spokesperson of the United Nations, Ismini Pala, confirmed that on April 12, a normal inspection resumed after all parties agreed on the list of ships that needed to be inspected. According to a United Nations representative, the parties involved in the agreement needed more time to reach agreement on operational priorities. Do you know what the priorities are? Ours is to provide as much grain as possible for countries that need it, and the Russians are to take into account their interests and the interests of fertilizer producers during the extension of the agreement. Foreign Minister Lavrov said this, not me. But this is not the first time that Russians have tried to manipulate the agreement. Allegedly, it was extended for 60 days, although according to the documents, it can only be for 120. I'll remind you that as part of the current deal, teams from Ukraine, Russia, the United Nations and Turkey inspect each ship to help prevent unauthorized cargo or passengers from moving in and out. But Ukrainian traders and authorities have said Russia is deliberately slowing the pace of inspections. That's hurting Ukrainian farmers' incomes and raising costs for traders. Moreover, on October 29, 2022, Russia announced that it would stop participating in the grain agreement. However, it resumed its participation in the grain agreement in just 3 days. And in another 2 weeks, the agreement was extended for 4 months. While defending itself from Russia's full-scale aggression, Ukraine has managed to export more than 50 million tons of food for hundreds of millions of people across the globe. We also support its coverage being expanded to Ukrainian ports in the Mykolaiv region. Russia has been repeatedly trying to disrupt the work of the grain initiative by blocking Ukrainian ports. Its policy of intended delays of the inspection of vessels continues and seriously damages the effectiveness of the grain corridor. For Ukraine's part, we fulfill all our obligations previously agreed with the United Nations and Turkey as mediators of the deal, and all our partners are well aware of this. The international community must make it clear to Russia that it will not allow it to use food as a weapon again and again. Ukraine continues its consistent and fruitful cooperation with African countries by attracting a number of special ambassadors for President Zelensky, Grain from Ukraine humanitarian initiative. We call on countries around the globe to join our Grain from Ukraine initiative in order to create food hubs in Africa, in particular in those regions which are critically depend on food imports. That concludes today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Goodbye.